In a shocking moment that has sent ripples through Africa's political landscape, President Cyril Ramaphosa has declared that debt has replaced the chains of slavery. With these explosive words, he called out the dangerous grip of foreign loans, warning that liberation movements risk becoming servants to new masters. This is more than an economic crisis, it's a betrayal of the freedom so many died for. Across Africa, nations are drowning in debt, and the consequences are devastating. Ramaphosa's message is a wake-up call: sovereignty is slipping away. In this gripping episode of SA Unfiltered, we break down what it really means when freedom is sold one loan at a time. Subscribe now. The truth is not negotiable. In a moment that stunned observers and sent tremors through political halls across Africa and beyond, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa issued a bold and unflinching warning to the continent's liberation movements and governments: debt has replaced the chains of slavery. With those 10 words, he wasn't simply diagnosing an economic challenge, he was ripping the veil of a neocolonial truth that many leaders have quietly tiptoed around for decades. In his rare moment of piercing clarity, Ramaphosa unearthed the uncomfortable parallels between past oppression and present bondage, reminding us all that while the shackles may no longer be made of iron, they are just as binding when made of contracts, compound interest. It was a message aimed squarely at the soul of the African political project, one that was built on the back of fierce resistance, hard-won sovereignty, and the blood of generations who died for freedom. And yet now, in the very seats of power those revolutionaries once dreamed of occupying, many liberation leaders are finding themselves cornered by external debt obligations, international financial institutions, and an increasingly unforgiving global economy. The banks may have replaced the colonialists. Ramaphosa's message didn't come in a vacuum. It came at a time when African economies are teetering. South Africa itself faces nearly unsustainable levels of public debt, youth unemployment hovering above 60%, and a national currency that continues to lose its footing amid global instability. But it's not just South Africa. Across the continent, the picture is grim. From Ghana to Kenya, from Zambia to Nigeria, nations are drowning in foreign debt. Much of it is owed to the World Bank, the IMF, and Ramaphosa's tone was that of an elder warning the next generation, a freedom fighter reminding his comrades what they were fighting for. And yet, his remarks raise a deeper question: how did we get here? How did liberation movements, once heralded as the vanguard of self-determination, become stewards of financial policies that mimic colonial control? The answer lies in a tragic shift, a pivot from revolutionary politics to managerial governance, from people's power to market logic. Over time, many. But the consequences of this shift are now unmistakable. Entire generations feel betrayed. Young people across Africa are rising in protest not just against poverty, but against a political elite they see as out of touch, captured, and compromised. In South Africa, this sentiment has fueled the rise of the economic freedom fighters and the resurgence of Umkhonto we Sizwe. In other countries, it sparked mass uprisings, coups, and rejections of Western influence. The debt trap is not just an economic. So when the president spoke those words, he was not only acknowledging a structural reality, he was issuing a veiled critique of the very institutions and choices that have enabled it. It was an admission that the economic model Africa has followed since the 1990s has failed. That the promise of trickle-down growth never materialized. That dependence on foreign capital has not delivered true development but has instead created a new form of colonization. The reaction to Ramaphosa's statement has been electric. Some praised him for speaking truth to power. Others questioned the sincerity of his message, pointing out that under his leadership, South Africa's debt has skyrocketed and austerity measures have deepened inequality. There's a bitter irony in a sitting president warning about debt slavery while presiding over a government that borrows billions to cover basic services. But perhaps that contradiction is the very point. Perhaps Ramaphosa, ever. Because what happens when a generation of Africans no longer believes in the promise of independence? When young people look at their lives and see no jobs, no future, and no real power over their destiny. When elections become rituals with no substance, and leaders become administrators of systems they do not control. That is the silent crisis unfolding beneath the surface of debt. Not just the economic pain, but the collapse of faith in the post-colonial order. Ramaphosa's warning is a call to arms. Not in the literal sense, but in the moral and political sense. It's a plea for a return to principle, to purpose, to people-centered governance. A challenge to liberation movements to remember why they existed in the first place. Not to preside over poverty in nice suits, not to negotiate crumbs from the tables of the global north, but to build economies that serve the many, not the few. To reimagine finance as a tool for development, not domination. But that vision won't be realized through speeches alone. It demands courage. It demands policy that defies orthodoxy. It demands leaders who are willing to say no to bad loans, to default if necessary, to nationalize when needed, to prioritize the masses over the markets. It requires a new generation of economists, thinkers, and activists who understand that Africa cannot borrow its way to freedom. And above all, it demands public pressure. The people must rise to reclaim their power. We must ask hard questions of our leaders. We must interrogate every loan, every tender, every privatization deal. Who benefits? Who profits? Who pays the price? Because every billion borrowed today is a chain on tomorrow's youth. Ramaphosa's words offer a rare moment of truth, but they must not remain just words. Let them be a turning point. Let them spark debate in universities, town halls, parliament chambers. Let them ignite movements that demand debt audits, reparations, and economic justice. Let them remind us that the Freedom Charter was not about balance sheets, it was about dignity. That the dreams of Luthuli, Mandela, Biko, and Sankara. As we reflect on the president's warning, one thing becomes clear: Africa stands at a crossroads. Down one path lies more of the same, endless debt, rising inequality, foreign domination in new clothes. Down the other lies a new horizon, one shaped by African solutions, homegrown development, and a rediscovery of the radical spirit that birthed our nations. And if you've made it this far, then you know this isn't just a story about economics or politics, it's a story about us. About whether we will allow the sacrifices of those who came before us to be reduced to footnotes in IMF reports. About whether we are ready to fight for the future we deserve. If this message moved you, if you believe Africa deserves more than debt and decay, then subscribe now to SA Unfiltered. We are not here to pacify. We are here to provoke. To question. To expose. And to empower. Because the time of empty promises is over. The new revolution begins with knowledge. And you've just taken the first step.